What was that? What did she just show? Hi, everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pinard. You're on BookTube. And today's video is going to be a buddy read discussion of The Underdogs, or Los de Abajo, by Mariano Azuela. So I've got my friend Greg. Come on up, Greg, to talk about the book that we both read. Ta-da! Welcome, welcome.
Yay!
So tell the lovely people about yourself and your YouTube channel, if you would.
Okay. My name is Greg. I'm currently in Virginia, a little bit south of Washington, D.C. I have had a BookTube channel for about 2 years now. And I just do random BookTube videos. I don't really have any specialty. You may see me talk about literary books like this one. I also do mystery books, I do horror books, I do science fiction books. So it's a bit of a grab bag on what I am going to be doing on my channel. And that's really about it.
Nice. Mystery, horror, and...
Literature, nonfiction.
Literature, nonfiction. I mean, that sounds kind of like what our C is, like, flavor of the month. So, and Anita. Anita's here as well. So that's great. So I had seen your video pop up about your plans for May of the Moderns, which is the readathon we're running this month. I am the host, as you can see. And it's just reading books from 1901 to 1945. So classics or forgotten classics.
Yes.
Written, published, or translated during that time. And you had posted about this book, and I had it on my like Latin American lit shelf. Yep. And I didn't realize it was from this period. So I'm so glad you did this, because now I've read it and now I can get rid of it. So, but in that video that you shared, you talked a little bit about the other books. So how is your May of the Moderns experience going? We're like 3/4 of the way through.
I am actually basically done. I did the Irish. I did a reread of The Dubliners by James Joyce. Nice. I'd read it about 20 years ago on audio. And I was going to read it again, but I didn't have time to read it. So I listened to another audiobook version. And I like James Joyce well enough. I don't love James Joyce. I'm not totally fascinated with him the way some people are. But
right.
he was an amazing talent as an author about what he accomplished. You know, like someone was saying, like the Dubliners was his stories that are accessible to most readers. You get into Ulysses, which is a lot harder to understand.
Yeah.
You get into Finnegan's Wake, and that's exponentially harder. And I've not done Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah. I keep Finnegan's Wake in the same corner of my cobweb brain as like Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. I'm like, nope, not even interested.
I like Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, but yeah, Finnegan's Wake, I don't know. I have my buddy Alan. He loves Finnegan's Wake, so he's gonna rope me into it someday.
Okay, all right. Well, good. And in terms of my reading for the readathon, I have read 4 books now and satisfied all 5 prompts as well. I think you may have been the only winner that I've seen so far. So
well, I haven't even mentioned everything. I've done the mystery or genre. I did The Glass Key by Dashiell Hammett.
Ooh, nice.
He's a really good early hard-boiled detective writer. Okay. Although this is not about his Continental Op. I was kind of surprised, a little disappointed. I thought it'd be about the Continental Op, but it was just San Francisco murder mystery. And it was pretty good. And then I am doing for my translation, and you have one about books that have been on your shelf for a while.
Yes.
I have Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities.
Yeah, a lot of people were in your comments about that. I hadn't heard of it before, but apparently it's a
1,700 pages long.
Oh God.
I'm only doing the first volume for this month, which is 725, and I'm going to call that a win when I finish it earlier this month.
All right.
It has no plot, really.
Yeah.
It's all descriptions about what life was like in Austria before World War I. And it's just philosophical discussions. They're interesting, but it's not something that you are gripped to read.
Right, not propulsive in any way.
There is a subplot about a murderer who is going to be executed, and the main character, Ulrich, is saying, well, can we stop his execution?
Okay.
And it's a little bit of there, but it's still, you are floored by the man's learning and understanding.
Okay.
Like, he's just one of those people who's incredibly intelligent. And I remember reading when it first came out in 1994 that he was a hopeless case in real life. He could not go to the bank and cash a check or deposit a check. His wife had to do all that kind of stuff for him, all the day-to-day.
What's that called? Weaponized incompetence, or was it like agoraphobia?
No, I think he was just so lost in his head.
Oh, okay.
And knowledge in his head that he says, I don't have time to learn how to cash a check.
That's subconscious weaponized incompetence, in my opinion. But yeah,
maybe, but you can definitely feel that he's just not living in the ordinary world. Yeah. And one more is I haven't done it yet, even though it counts as personal. I'm doing some poetry of Langston Hughes. Okay,
well, I said roots in Africa, Asia, or South America. So yeah, African American will qualify for the.
Yeah, well, it's double dipping, really.
Yeah, which I was doing as well. So yeah, definitely encouraged double dipping in prompts and double dipping in readathons, because I mean, a lot of these apply to Misery May, and maybe Montgomery May, and maybe Horror Mayhem. There's plenty of like double qualifiers.
Oh yeah.
But let me ask you, what are your initial impressions, or overall, I should say, overall impressions of the Underdogs?
My overall impression is meh. Okay. I'm pretty sure I read this in the 80s. When I was really young, and I remember not really liking it, and I read it again, especially when I was looking for book to fill a prompt. Said, well, let's look at this one again. And my problem is that I think part of it is the way that it was written. As I understand, it was written originally as short newspaper stories. And you can see that the chapters rarely go over 5 or 6 pages in length. Yeah. And there's not a whole lot of continuous story between. I mean, you had the same characters and some of their actions follow, but you can see he just writing story after story after story until he was done. And the translation, I think he mentioned, it's a very wooden translation. I remember reading somewhere an article is that the person who translated this was actually like a member of an embassy staff or something. Oh,
okay. And just to give credit where it's due, or not credit, I think it's Ernesto Mejia Jr. So.
Yeah, and the person has never translated anything again. This is the one and only translation. Okay. And I could see them saying, well, this book is important in Mexico. Let's get this out to English-speaking authors, and not really going for someone who really was a storytelling author.
Yeah.
This is more like a translator who translated government documents,
Who did not have a storyteller's heart at
no.
core. Yeah.
But you could tell that the author did. He was passionate about some of his characters and the revolution, and that's what kept me going. And I have to admit, I read like the first part of this, which is like the first 86 pages in the book, and then I listened to the audiobook, the last half, which is public domain on LibriVox. And then this morning I reread like the last 4 chapters of the book, just picked it up again.
Yeah, to get the feel of it again.
You just get the feel. I was like, saying, well, I got to talk about this book today, so let's reinvigorate myself about it.
Yeah.
And I would give it 3 stars. I mean, I'm not really a star rater, but it's worthwhile to pick up, because how many, at least Americans like me, really know a lot about the Mexican Revolution?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's obviously very important to Mexico. But for me, there's no historical context in this book, because it was written in 1914, and the author would assume that all of his readers in this newspaper would know all about the Mexican Revolution, what happened, and he did not have to go over it again about what happened in some of the major themes. So
Right.
there's that distance that hard to overcome.
Yeah. I do get a sense of some of the things I didn't know before. So I did learn a little bit about the Mexican Revolution by reading this book, and possibly because I was reading the reviews to try to make sense of it. But yeah, the fact that one of the reviews said it wasn't like another war. Let me see if I can pull that up. This is the stuff that you just said. It's relates the adventures of a group of rebels under the leadership of Demetrio Macias, a peasant farmer who unintentionally becomes a revolutionary after drawing the ire of the local police chief. His motley band of peasant fighters is joined by Luis Cervantes, interesting name choice, an educated young man of the city who becomes Demetrio's trusted advisor. He enters the war as an idealist, but soon becomes a shrewd opportunist. And sort of everyone goes through their own sort of revolution in the course of these battles that we see like glimpses of. One can sense that Azuela actually believes in the ideals, but saw little actualization of them during his service in the war. So perhaps that's who he's putting his like point of view into, is the educated guy. His disillusionment is palpable throughout the novel. On the other hand, he does glorify the revolutionaries for their recklessness and roguishness, much in the way that anti-heroes are glorified in American Westerns like The Wild Bunch, which I thought was an interesting comparison, so I'll ask you about that. Los de Abajo is not a typical war novel, just as the Mexican Revolution was not a typical war. So what I learned in terms of that factual piece is that, you know, there were lots of different factions. They were sort of eating each other until they got to the main one, and there was a definite urban-rural divide. There was a definite like looting whatever you came across, which I feel like is familiar to West African civil wars that I've studied, and also drafting. Like, you weren't necessarily soldiering for a cause that you espoused, you were drafted into it and you had no choice, you were kidnapped or whatever. And so a lot of those things I was like, oh, okay, like this is some context, but not the conquistadors, the caciques, like I didn't know sort of what these names that are specific to the place meant unless I looked them up. So yeah. Anti-heroes and glorifying the roguishness.
Well, the one scene, what was the scene where they're shooting bottles?
Oh, off the waiter's head?
Yes, and they grace his ears. Oh, here's money, no big loss. And I did feel that, and I sort of got what it would be like to be in a country that was under sort of like a civil war, where you don't have standing armies, but you just have bands of insurgents, I guess, is now what we call them, is insurgents rather than a standing army.
Rebels, yeah. Richard is here. Hi, Richard. He's listening while folding laundry. And I just popped up the link to the review that I was reading from, which is by a blogger named Carl Jansen, who does lots of classic literature, so you might like his reviews and such. Yes. Okay, so let me return. General enjoyment, check. Structure. We sort of talked about the structure. It's sort of short stories for newspaper articles as it's originally intended, and it doesn't really form a very coherent plot all the way through. So you have to sort of take it for glimpses or like scenes in a life rather than a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about themes, like either the war themes or the like gender themes that you may have noticed, or class, like education? What did you think about?
Well, like you said, there are two instances. There is Demetrio, who's basically a peasant, and there's Luis Cervantes, which is the intellectual who adopts the revolution as an ideal, that this is an important thing that we need to be doing. So you have those two, and how at first Demetrio was like, no, you're an intellectual, I'm not going. There's a couple times, we're just going to go out and kill you, right? And then
tenderfoot. He terrorizes him, yeah.
Then he goes, well, he believes in the revolution. Maybe we can use him. And he becomes very solid and important to this band of, let's just call them insurgents or whatever you want to do, you know. But it amazes me just how important a lot of people felt the revolution was. I picked this out just this morning, where it's like the beginning of part 3. It's like, what's the difference? I love the revolution, like a volcano in eruption. I love the volcano because it is a volcano. The revolution because it is a revolution.
Yeah, it's talking in circles to me. So he's talking into like what he wants, his self-interest, I think. Okay, so what's interesting, and maybe you'll have something to say about Joyce in here, but when I'm reading this about the insurgents, since you're going to call them that, it makes me think of Frank O'Connor's Soldiers in the Irish Civil War, because I'm reading the best of Frank O'Connor's short stories now as well. It's like a big 600-page, so it's taken me a while. And he starts out with the war stories, and it's a lot of like random happenings, like people who have abandon their principles. They're just trying to survive. The like wriggling they will do and betrayals they will perform to survive, and how war is just pointless. Like you end up being on the side of people who are just going to do the same things as the people you just kicked out, is what the point of this one was. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. And this is, I think, one of the modern themes that we're going to be discussing at the end of this. War is pointless. Yeah.
I mean, any country that goes through that sort of infighting, you know, I mean, I hesitate to call this a civil war. I don't. It's like really hard to describe what the revolution really was. Yeah. Other than, I mean, they did have armed people fighting, so definitely some sort of war, but not standing.
The side definitely seems devastated by the end of all the looting and the pillaging. Okay. What about the women who are characters? So the two that stand out to me, there's the wife at the beginning who comes in at the end as a symbol, which I thought was nice, like literature wise. But then the two main ones that stand out to me are the woman called Warpaint and Camilla. And they're an interesting face-off because they seem very different. For a moment, they're going to work together, and then they become enemies, and then one of them survives and one does not. What did you think about that as a choice or as like a representation?
You know, I did not focus too much on those characters. It's like you read the episodes and say, okay, I'm now sort of remembering there was who's the woman who kept talking about losing her money or being stolen?
Oh, that was the woman beggar at the end who is a shrewd opportunist. Yes. That's not one of the ones I'm including as a main person. But yeah, her voice is definitely impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well-dressed man stole my suitcase. I'm an old woman. It was all my life savings. And she's collecting money as a beggar. And everyone's getting mad because a well-dressed man shouldn't be stealing from an old woman. And it's like the power structure that they're commenting on.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this was not a book that focused a lot on the women characters. Yeah, it's just they're sort of background characters. So,
yeah,
when I read it, you know, I said they did not make an impression on me as something memorable.
Well, the ones that were like characters throughout most of the story, or Warpaint is at the end, but Camilla is throughout most of the story, and she is like treating the men after their first or second battle, and one of them who she's treating, she falls in love with, and then she is unrequited in that love. He's the intellectual. He wants nothing to do with her, but later he sees a chance to gain out of this person who loves him by offering her to the general, who also likes her but is sort of more indiscriminate in his likes. So he like makes off with her and hands her to the general, and she ends up like, I don't know, I'm imagining shackled to his bed. And then she has to deal with the situation where Warpaint, who is like the hardened urban, or not urban, I guess. She's come from the countryside as well. But she's definitely one of the opportunists who acts like a man and is like, I'm taking this, I'm taking that, like, throw me that, and I don't care who does what. and to have those be like the images at the end that compete with Demetrio's wife image. I don't know if you remember this, but he stops from looting a big house at the end because he has a memory of his wife walking away from his own house with the child and into the darkness, and he goes, no, I don't want to loot this house, I want to burn it because that's what they did to my house, and no one knows.
Oh yeah, the burning of the house is
Yeah, and they're like, they didn't know what their general was doing because like it was all in his head. And I was like, oh, that was a nice literary moment.
literary.
Yeah, yeah. There are very few. So I caught on that.
There are very few. I mean,
Yeah. So, all right. So themes, language translation, we talked on a bit, but I'm going to bring up another review. This one's from Storygraph and a little shorter.
okay.
Why? I'll put it in the comments. A book whose themes and moments are more intriguing than its character or plot. The translation of this edition was wooden and stilted, but the lessons you can glean from its pages are worth the short read. This is a book that's incredible more as an historical artifact than as a piece of literature. I was like, yes, that pretty much encapsulates it. And why I was like 3 stars as well, because I wasn't pulled forward. I was getting people confused at the beginning because there's another review that said this has terrible attributions or antecedents. So I'm constantly going, who said that? Wait, paragraph break, and it says he, and who is talking? I don't know. And like you're searching.
And it's hard to know if that's just the translation.
Yeah.
One of the I remember reading some that there's a lot of like calling people by an attribute that does not. They said the translation is like, doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
I mentioned this in the beginning before we started. Like the first line is, "That's no animal. I tell you, listen to the dog barking. It must be a human being." Now, as I said, I picked up the original Spanish to try to follow along, and in the original Spanish, the dog is named Pal something.
Palumbo. Yeah.
Palumbo. You said it was like angel.
Someone I read about had said that means angel, perhaps.
So why did the translator drop the name and just say dog? I mean, my Spanish is not good enough to pick out that level of detail.
Yeah.
So just curious things about the book. And like you said, it really did not grip me at all.
Yeah.
It's just like you're reading a text assignment. And what I mentioned before is like, I think this would have been much more important at the time it was published, and you understand the context of everything. We are now 110 years since it was written. And I said, I don't know a lot about the Mexican Revolution at all. It's a piece of history that I never learned anything about. So there's all this happening. And if I wanted to really get more from the book, I'd have to read a chapter and say, okay, what was really going on in the revolution at the time?
Yeah.
And I did not get that level of a deep dive.
Yeah. I think the English translation came out either in 1924 or 29, revised. I'm not sure. They have both dates. But I think that would have been an interesting time in the US as well, because the 20s, I mean, you got prohibition going on. You've got interwar economic like craziness, speculation. I'm sure there's people who are trying to make money off of this from the American side. I loved when they referred to the Northerners with their Texas hi-hats and their $4 shoes imported from the USA, like they were just highfalutin high rollers. It's interesting, the relationship with that at that time. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's for languages translation. Oh, and now for the reveal of the illustration. So the background that I've put on here is like a painting and a third, because I wanted it to cover the whole thing. And this is, let's see if I can make us smaller. I don't know if I can. The illustrator in this edition of the book, which we both read, there were some disturbing images. Like, okay, so they're very just sort of cheap to put in the book. They're just black.
They're ink sketches, I think.
Yeah, just like
or charcoal sketches. I'm not positive.
But there's one with like a hanged person that I was
Yeah,
like,
I was looking for the hanged person.
I got it. So like, it didn't come after the portion where the person is hanged. It came before. So I was like, what do we do? Again, like structure choices, but they're very sort of like dashed off.
Yes, they're very quick. It's like someone in a sketchbook.
Yeah.
Say, hey, can you sketch this for me? They write it out on a piece of paper. Here you go.
Yeah. The second one, I couldn't tell what was going on. Like I looked at it, and it was like a Rorschach test. I could not like define anything in the picture. So, hit or miss. But if you look behind here, I took one of Orozco, the painter. He's a famous modern painter, painted on into the 40s and beyond. And so I took this one because I loved the title. The title I can easily translate from Spanish. It was Bufones del Estadio, which is like idiots of the state. So it's these people dressed up in caps and feathers and I'm sure chevrons and shiny little pins.
Yeah.
Make a point of talking about that. And boots. And they're walking around like doing nothing. So idiots of the state. So that was like the view of the people in the book, is that the government was the problem. But then when, a rebel takes over the government, what's to stop them from becoming a new problem? So.
Yep. You know what? The quote from Kafka, which would probably have been very close around this time, that every revolution produces the slime of a new bureaucracy or something like that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I was going to ask about the tone, but that sort of combines two other things.
Yeah.
Like, what would you say about the tone of the book?
It's for me, it was very distant. You really never got like Demetrio. I mean, he's the main character for the most part. I mean, but you really can't get too much into him. The way, like a really good character when you read a novel, that you get into their feelings. You can say he's passionate about the revolution. He had some issue, but not strong characterizations. Now, I don't know what you thought about that. I mean, you write novel, you write characters. I mean, what would you think about that character as someone in your book?
So, like, Storygraph, when you rate a book, has you, let's see if I can like bring up the questions, but they're very simple questions that you answer or you check off a box to sort of give the short version of your review. And so let's see what I said. Plot or character driven, a mix, because I think the characters of the classes of people do drive the action, but not individual characters. Strong character development, I said it's complicated because I feel like we got to see a little bit of Demetrio's internal conflict when he's had that moment thinking about his wife and all that he'd betrayed and how he was going forward. And then also with Luis Cervantes, the intellectual, when he was talking to his friend Solis, who he sees and who's like, what are you doing here? And, they have different sort of coping strategies as intellectuals with like dashed hopes from this revolution that's just falling to pieces. So that was interesting to see like where he'd come from and what he'd changed to at that point. Lovable characters. It's complicated. Did you love anyone in this book?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I mean, the only character who I had any really affinity would be Luis Cervantes. I mean, because out of everyone, I in this book, I would have been, I probably would consider an intellectual, in their culture. So I can sort of see that, saying, I'm an intellectual. I can really get behind this revolution. I think they have some important ideas. What can I do to help? So I can sort of relate to him.
Okay. I liked the exposition of the character who he talked down to, actually. The guy who was a medical man in his own town, Venancio, something like that. And he writes a letter to him toward the end, trying to lure him into a business deal.
Oh yes.
And he's trying to say, and you'll get status, and you'll be a respected man if you do this like treasure hunt with me, kind of thing. And it's just like, yeah, you're just trying to take advantage of a person who's already like at the bottom of the heap. Like, that's terrible. So that, and I guess I sympathize with Warpaint, and I like that she like leaves the scene with like her gun blazing, her loot in the back, and no one touching her. You know, she's like the bandito or bandita that I like have some respect for by the end. So I like that. Diverse cast of characters. I said yes, because we've got people of color who represent the main cast, so it's a diverse book, but also we've got a range of urban, rural, and upper lower class, and like government officials in all different ways. So I thought that was pretty diverse. Are the flaws of the character a main focus? Yes. So it's just interesting to see that like there are pieces of this that dive into the meat of the subject matter, but just not in a story way. So you just have to sort of absorb it as it is. Yeah. The moral kind of touched on. And so I thought this had stuff to compare with Frank O'Connor's war stories.
I have not read those though.
Is there anything in this, like in your other Moderns reads for this year, that like you see things kind of communicating with each other, or not at all?
No, just because, you know, I'm just saying for Dubliners, no, that's just sort of a slice of Dublin. There's no, I mean, there's some lower class people in there,
mm-hmm.
but they're not the peasant the way the Mexican peasants were.
They're urban, so it's different. Yeah,
it is different.
They call people dudes in this. When they start like name calling at the end, like they're hurling insults at the city people, the dudes dressed up.
I would not trust that at all.
That word, yeah. Dude would mean something different in 1920, you know, like, yeah.
And like the Robert Musil, he's just out there in like very high class, very intellectual, rich, talking. And I guess the story, the murderer Moosburger would have been like a butcher, and so he would have been very lower class. So they've got these ideals. And look, let's help out this poor lower class man who's going to be executed for a murder. And he is a murderer. No, there's no doubt that the character is a murderer.
Okay.
And so it's not like you think, well, he's been wrongfully convicted. You say, well, he's insane. You shouldn't kill insane people. So you got this idealism going on.
And in this book, the idealists are either corrupted or absent. So at the end, that the big houses that they raid where the people aren't there or they're trying to hide. I don't remember the guy who was in the cupboard, and it was like,
yeah, they said no. It was a whorehouse with the women. We don't have them.
Spinsters with children, like
yeah. No, it's not spinsters, whatever.
Yeah. But when he comes to that house and it's like it's empty and they're just like picking up all this paper and burning the books and like grabbing the diamonds that they find, it was affecting to see all that material culture that they didn't have. And I feel like that was actually kind of a deft move, like to show what they didn't have and couldn't appreciate because they weren't like up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs yet. They were still fighting for survival and shelter and food and, you know, access to water. Meanwhile, these people who may have high flowing ideals, like they have escaped to probably another country because they have the means.
Yeah, and the one character saying, "I'll buy all your books from you."
Yeah,
because you know, obviously someone realized that maybe you shouldn't be burning those things. You know,
to have one of the women go through and go, "Oh, this book has pictures of naked women," and it's Dante's Inferno, so she starts ripping out the pictures with all the naked women because that's gonna be what worth something. I don't know. She just liked them. It's like the things that I think the readers would hold sacred are made profane in this sort of looting, and I thought that was pretty pretty stark, pretty well done, I guess. So we had a BS Warren. Hello. I didn't recognize that name. So nice to see you here. Richard is commenting on my background. How do you know it's not a virtual background, Richard? Yes, Emma's supplying the details. And yeah, just saying hi to the new people. If you've got questions, let's go.
Overall, like I said, if I were ever to try to reread it, and I doubt I would definitely try to go for the more modern translation, or just really brush up my Spanish and try to see how much Spanish could I get through. But I don't,
Spanish. You'd be reading like Zorro's Spanish.
What's it? Buenas noches, la luna. That's,
yeah.
That's I can do that in Spanish, but
yeah. Oh, we didn't talk about the title. I was going to do that at the outset. So I was talking about this to Amy when I was reading this yesterday on our reading corner, little sprints. And I was like, so Underdogs is really overused at this point in the US. It's used for sports and it's used for like trivial uses, I would say, and over saturated. But Los de Abajo, like those from below, feels
those from below.
Yeah, right?
You mean, that just, the thing is, we don't have anything like that in English. But, when you think about that, it's like when you think about all the people that are below you, and it's like
in the social structure.
And why are they below us? Really? I mean, that's our view of them.
Yeah.
Is saying like, oh, you're below us because you're a poor peasant. And maybe the poor peasants don't really want to be those from below. They want to be respected for what they are. And like I said, Underdogs is just not a good translation.
Yeah.
I did read the introduction to the new one, and the translator said, yeah, it's a really bad translation. But do I really want to retranslate a book and rename it?
Like, what would you propose is better? Like the underclass, or like underlings, or I don't know. What I
don't know. I mean, it's a very good. You may want to just. It's maybe one of those cases where you don't want to stick with like the noun. I guess it's sort of like a noun. Notes from below. Rise above. I don't know. Underdwellers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then I mean, if you're gonna change it, like, do you change the whole motion? Because then you're describing something different.
It is. I mean,
people in relation. Are you describing their arc that they make? Yeah.
Well, that's the whole problem of translation is that when you come across words that don't fit the language you're translating in, what do you do?
Yeah.
I mean, in some cases, translators. I read a book for the BookTube Prize by Lahari. She translated from Italian, and she said, sometimes you're translating a book and title says the original title just cannot go into English. And you have to make the best judgment of how to convey to an English speaker what the author wants to tell.
Yeah. And then there's the cover. There's lots of cues you can give the reader.
Yeah.
As an author, like that. Some of that's fun. Some of that's like nail-bitingly nervous.
Dostoevsky can go poor folk.
Oh, okay. The Russian. I don't know what the Russian title is for that. Do you?
No, I don't know. I just thought about that because all the characters are poor folk. Really, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a translator, so
yeah, it's interesting to consider, and I'm glad I had it as a prompt because I think that was like encouraging people to read other books than normal. So, how it fits with other modern lit, we sort of covered that. other things. I had turned down Corners, Horror of Horrors, and I like looking back, I can't find what I was trying to say, or like we already covered it. So I don't have anything specific to read out, I guess.
I have a couple.
Okay.
I did put a couple of these tabs, and again, this is on page 17 of mine.
Much cleaner.
Tabs. It goes.
I had one where it was just like nonsensical the way it said something in a really awkward voice and dialogue, and then switched to a different point of view for narrating action, and I was like, what is happening here? But I can just describe that because I can't find it now. So
yeah, I mean, my tabs, I'm looking at them right now, and I'm going, I have no idea why.
Yeah,
I tabbed
I'll
it, other than
give you a second to find something, and I'll just tell all the people who might be coming here for the buddy read and not know about the readathon itself. We've got 5 prompts if you want to read something for the last 10 days of May. We're focusing on classics. We've got an Irish Celtic. We've got a people of color with roots in Africa, South America, or Asia. We've got translated lit. We've got TBR veterans that have been on your shelf for far too long collecting dust, which this one fits for me. I'm going to pass it on as soon as we're finished. And genre. So, yeah, this doesn't really fit in any genre because of the weird structure, so I didn't count on that. Well,
let me read the why. I don't know why I tabbed this. I guess it's sort of interesting.
Okay.
This is one of the characters speaking. The revolution benefits the poor, the ignorant, all those who have been slaves all their lives, all the unhappy people who do not even suspect they are poor because the rich who stand above them, the rich who rule them, change their sweat and blood and tears into gold.
Mm. Mm.
I feel that. I mean, because
that was a good moment.
We actually do that in our country right now.
Mm.
So.
Yeah, and one of the things that Amy and I were discussing, so I started out reading, what was the other book I was reading? I can't even remember now. It must, anyway, I'll let it go. I can't remember. But we were talking about why people are constantly kept at a disadvantage, and how, you know, it's not just a mindset thing. It's also sort of inherent disadvantage, or the inconvenience of having a certain type of job. So I think what we were bringing up was, oh, I know. It was The Road to Wigan Pier. So George Orwell's nonfiction book about North Industrial England in the 1930s. And Richard's going to love this if he's still listening while folding laundry. It's pretty anti-capitalist. But he's talking about the fact that coal miners, you know, you think when you hear what their wages and that they have a 7.5-hour shift, well, that's pretty good. Doesn't that mean they have a good life? And you're like, well, no, let me tell you, they have accidents and they have no insurance, and they have to, you know, pay for the bathrooms at their work site themselves out of their union. And they have to walk for an hour to get to the place where they start their shift. Like, that is a creeping 4-foot, can't stand up, scratches along your back, things falling on your nose, like can't stand up existence at the beginning and end of every shift. And you're just like, this is not something that's going to allow for rest and leisure and good health a lot of times, and, you know, education and any sort of things that would change your situation to be able to get to a better situation. So, like, we were just talking about how all those inconveniences are baked into a lot of those jobs that are poorly paid, and that's why there is a consistent underclass, and that's why people have kept it that way, because it advantages some gold. Yeah.
And as I said, it's still going on right now in the United States, is that it benefits the people for the revolution about to keep them poor.
Yeah.
You know,
like
and
Nickel and Dimed. Did you read Nickel and Dimed or any of these? Like,
I did read Nickel and Dimed.
It's like 20 years ago now, but yeah.
Yeah. My only criticism is that she really did not dive into what you need to do if you're truly poor.
And it was already terrible. So, like, just imagine more. She was doing a conservative estimate of how impossible this life was. And, like, yeah.
And the thing, my criticism is that she insisted on a place of her own to make, and I said, if you're that poor, you don't get that choice.
Yeah.
You say, okay, here's an apartment. Okay, here's a 2-bedroom with 3 people. I got to share a bedroom with someone who I'm not related with. I mean, that's what really poor people do.
Right.
I remember one of my wife's best friends at one time married a Pakistani man who was living in an apartment with 20 people.
Yep. Overcrowding.
That's poor. That's what people who are truly poor do.
Right.
They don't say, well, I get an apartment to myself.
She's an investigative reporter. She had boundaries. I'm not going to criticize her for that.
All I'm saying is, like, she didn't go where she needed to go, but I understand.
Well, yeah. In that case, like, I don't know. I would see that was probably going outside of her comfort zone even more in terms of
just way outside.
Yeah. So, but just to say that, like, this underclass idea that supports the structure that benefits up, so the profits all flow up rather than having any room or ability to change your social station. But like you said, they may not feel it in terms of social status, but when they get to breaking into a big mansion and seeing all that stuff that they realize has been hidden from them and hoarded from them as a society, it's like, oh, okay, I see the score now. And then you've got trouble.
You do. I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it has its points, and I can still see why it's still published today and still read today, even though it's not a great novel.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, we were talking about the beginning of modernism. You know, he fits in the modernist era, but I'm not sure I'd call this a modernist novel. Not in the way like James Joyce's and reaching out and exploring new ideas, or who would be some of the other great modernists that would D.H. Lawrence. You don't think no,
Lawrence? He is. I just don't like him. Yeah.
But no, he pushed the limits.
Kafka,
you know, he didn't publish though, really. He just some minor short stories, you know, but he was all
okay.
You know, but still, no, he like the trial. Excuse me. Yeah, he had some great. He definitely saw the world in a new way, which I guess is what the modernism is about. Is like opening up to viewing the world in a new way. So let me go back and let me go back and think. It's like he's looking at peasants and the poor folk in a way that maybe wasn't done before. Is that fair?
Yeah, having them be the subject.
Have them be
the protagonist.
So maybe I'm being a little harsh on that, saying he's not. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. All right.
You know, just because I read it once over last week doesn't mean I know everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Reviews are always some part subjective and some part truth of the matter, right? So yeah. With my other reading, let's see, Crock of Gold by James Stevens. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't. Heard
of it. So I use Libro.fm for audiobooks frequently, and they came out with a rash of like new classics on audiobook. And so this popped up and I was like, huh. So I clicked on it and it was like Celtic mythology meets, you know, like modern story. And I thought this was very interesting. And so I was able to count it for my Irish Celtic one. And it's a lot of philosophizing and like moralizing, but in a mocking way, which is very Irish, to expose sort of like the point of life and like the profit that you lose. And melding the sort of old mythology with the new negotiation of power and contentment and what that actually is in modern Ireland at the time of actually this is before the Civil War, so this is 1912, before 1916. Yeah, I thought that was really, really good, but no one's ever heard of James Stephens. I mean, the name itself is like, is that even Irish? So I would recommend that to people. I thought it was very interesting as an audiobook because they could do accents really well. Did you said you listened to this in audiobook partly? Did you?
Yeah, I did. It's a LibriVox. Here's the thing: the narrator, obviously, I think he was Hispanic, and I think English was his second language. Mm-hmm. But he did just fine.
Yeah,
he was understandable. Not a professional audible narrator by any mean, but it was like if I were to narrate an audiobook, I could probably make it work most of the time, but not to the point where you say, "Oh yeah, I'll go buy this book with this narrator."
Got it. Okay. All right.
I mean, they're volunteers, so
LibriVox's free service is pretty cool.
It is.
What else did I have? How Do You Live? That's also about moral sort of edification. Have you heard of that one? Japanese translation.
How Do You Live?
Mm-hmm.
No.
I had two people I think have recommended it to me on BookTube. It's by Yoshino. It's 1937 Japan, and instead of having a textbook on ethics, they made it into a story about this kid who was 15 and going through some hard things. And it sort of reads more like a younger middle grade, but that also might be because of the period and everyone was much more earnest and like trying to do their best because of the culture and the time. I don't know. But yeah, it's been a lot of like moral message. So that's the themes I'm getting from the readathon this year. I don't know. I just happened to be because of the books I had available and fit the prompts. So
okay.
Yeah. Interesting that it fell out that way.
Yeah, the thing is, I love this period of writing. The modernists, like, I love Faulkner. I think I know people have some issues with Faulkner, but I just think, he did so much that was not done in writing before. It's like Sound of the Fury. It's like, I know people can complain about how difficult that book is, but what he did was just amazing. And there's this whole crop of authors around that time that just started reinventing literature in ways that were not done before. And I just really think it's a fascinating time to read a lot of books from. Which is sad because he said this is the last year for May of the Moderns.
Yeah, I think I've sort of like I've boiled the pot dry, as it were, because like I've been reaching and I'm like, I think this has served the purpose for me. So I'm going to try something new that'll take me in a different direction. But yeah, it's been fun. It's definitely exposed me to more things that I never would have picked up, and expanded the viewpoint and trying to get in other people's points of view. So that's good. I haven't read a single Edith Wharton since like college, and like I know people are reading her, and I remember loving a couple of her books. I should go back to that. It wasn't so much that she reinvented writing, but she was definitely tackling issues of like psychology and women's behavior in structure of society that were like earth shattering at the time. And so I really liked that, as well as her turn of phrase. I really like her writing. And to go from something like this, it's so choppy, to be like, can I go back to like the cream puff writing again? That would be a good chaser.
Yeah, I did Age of Innocence.
Yeah.
That was I mean, it was 20 years ago, so if you ask me the details, I'm not going to be very confident. But I
haven't read any lately either. I remember pulling quotes in high school and college from those books that were just so visceral that I put them up on my college collage board and stuff, that I can still recall, from the House of Mirth, and I can't remember the other one, but yeah, I don't think it was the Age of Innocence. I think it was a different one. But yeah, a good period for different reasons. Definitely lots of literature to choose from, so you can pick your flavor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we've covered all we can on this buddy
so.
read. I'm so happy that you agreed to sort of discuss it together. I didn't get a lot of like, you know, things arranged this time. I was just sort of letting it unroll as it would. And
good, because really it's hard to discuss this book. I mean, there's not.
Yeah. But hopefully the readathon will expose people to some different histories, some different viewpoints, some different styles, and even, you know, illustrators. If you're curious about the illustrator of the book, that could take you down a different art rabbit hole if that's your thing. So yeah. So I hope that's been entertaining for everyone. Yeah.
And really, I mean, you should, you know, if you find, he said, if you're at a used bookstore and you see this on the $1 rack or $2 rack, pick it up.
It's worth a day's reading.
It's worth picking up and browsing through, just because you learn or get introduced to the Mexican Revolution, which, you know.
Yeah. Which, growing up in California, I should have known a little more about. All we learned about was the missions. I wonder if people in Texas learned more about it, like Pancho Villa and that kind of
I have no idea.
Yeah. If anyone is watching who's from Texas, let us know. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and thank you, Greg, for joining. Definitely check out Greg's channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. And if you are from Greg's channel, hello. Welcome to mine, and subscribe if you like buddy reads and booktube book reviews. I do those at least twice a week. So
cool.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, and happy reading.